You are much stronger than you've been told. But life has a strange sense of humor, doesn't it? Sometimes it places people in front of us who don't speak. They shout. They raise their voices like generals on a battlefield, as if screaming at you will somehow fix their lives or break yours. And if you've ever stood there thinking, why is this person yelling at me like I'm the reason the world's falling apart? You're not alone. Here's the thing. Getting screamed at can shake even the calmest of men. But understanding why people raise their voices, that's where you find your power. That's where Stoic strength lives, in the space between their chaos and your response. In this video, we'll uncover 10 reasons people scream at you, not to justify their behavior, but to give you clarity. Because when you understand the game, you no longer have to play it. You stand still, unshaken, a mountain in the storm. So, take a breath, and let's walk through this together, calm, clear, and ready. 1. They can't control themselves. Some people are ruled by their emotions the way a ship is ruled by a storm. Wild, chaotic, and entirely at the mercy of forces they never learned to navigate. And when they yell, when they lash out, it isn't about you. It's about them. I know it doesn't feel like that in the moment. It feels personal. It feels sharp. But if you've lived long enough, and I suspect you've seen this before. People who can't control themselves often try to control others instead. And the quickest weapon they grab? Their voice, loud, angry, and reckless. I remember a man I worked with years ago. Let's call him Tom. Tom was the kind of guy who walked into a room and filled it with tension before he even opened his mouth. And when things didn't go his way, you knew a storm was coming. He'd raise his voice, pound his fist on the table, red-faced, leaning in closer, as if volume could make up for a lack of reason. It wasn't hard to see that Tom lived on a short fuse. But what struck me wasn't the shouting. It was what was underneath it. Fear, frustration, a deep lack of control over himself. It was like he was drowning in his own emotions and needed anyone to throw the rope to. And screaming, that was his way of signaling distress, even if he didn't know it. Now, it's easy to get pulled into that kind of storm, to shout back, to defend yourself, to meet fire with fire. But you already know where that road leads. It never ends well. What Stoic philosophy offers us is a different path. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." When someone else loses their grip, your job is to hold yours tighter. Their chaos doesn't have to become your chaos. You see, Tom wasn't my responsibility. His emotions were his to manage, but mine were in my hands. And when I stopped trying to fix him or explain myself to him, and instead stood there quietly, calmly, it changed everything. Not him, me. I left those moments with my dignity intact because I didn't hand it over just to join his shouting match. Men like Tom are everywhere, at work, in the family, on the street. And when you meet them, remember this: they're often yelling because they can't hear themselves think. But you can. And that makes all the difference. The man who can stay steady when others are coming undone, that's the man people remember. That's the man who commands respect without saying a word. So, the next time someone screams at you, don't ask, "What did I do?" Ask instead, "What's going on inside them?" And then take a breath. Be the steady one, because the world has enough men who shout. What we need, is more men who stand still. 2. They're afraid. Fear is a quiet force that often hides behind noise. It doesn't always look like worry lines and trembling hands. More often, it disguises itself as anger, bluster, and shouting. A man who raises his voice in rage is often a man standing on the edge of something he doesn't know how to face. And in that moment, he believes that volume will give him the control he feels slipping away. When people are afraid, they grasp at anything that might make them feel powerful again. Yelling becomes a kind of shield, a loud, desperate attempt to push back against a situation they can't control. They may not even realize they're doing it. It happens in boardrooms when a man lashes out in a meeting because the numbers don't add up, and he knows it will fall on him. It happens at home when a father shouts at his son for something small because, deep down, he's terrified of losing connection with the boy as he grows older. Fear makes people reach for the only tool they think they have left, their voice, and they use it like a weapon. But as Stoics, we're called to see through the noise. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself and us that external events, whether it's another person's fear or fury, are beyond our control. What matters is how we choose to respond. When a man yells at you, it's not always an act of aggression. Often, it's fear wearing the mask of anger. Recognizing that softens your reaction. It allows you to stand in your own space, unaffected by his storm. This doesn't mean you excuse the behavior. It doesn't mean you make yourself small or tolerate disrespect. It means you don't get pulled into his panic. You stay anchored. You breathe. You remember that someone else's fear does not have to become your fear. There's a quiet power in that. A man who can remain calm in the face of another's shouting is a man who owns himself. His dignity isn't up for negotiation. He doesn't need to shout to be heard, because he's listening for what's underneath the real battle being fought behind the words. And that's where the opportunity lies, not to fix the other man, but to master yourself, to stand still when fear rattles the windows and shakes the walls. To remember, as the Stoics taught, that the only thing truly within your power is your mind. And to use that power not to dominate others, but to remain unshaken by them. 3. They want control. When a man raises his voice, it's often not because he wants to be heard. It's because he wants to be obeyed. Yelling isn't always a loss of control. Sometimes it's a deliberate attempt to gain control, to dominate the room and bend others to his will. It's an old tactic, really. The louder the voice, the more people instinctively recoil, back down, or give in. And that's exactly what some men are counting on. They scream to create an imbalance, to make others feel smaller so they can feel larger. It's not a conversation they're after. It's compliance. At its core, this is a game of power. There's something deeply unsettling about a man who relies on volume to maintain his position. It's often because, deep down, he doubts his own strength. Real authority, true leadership, doesn't need to shout. It speaks quietly and commands attention by its very presence. But when a man is unsure of his standing, when he feels that respect isn't being given freely, he'll often try to seize it by force. And the easiest weapon at his disposal is his voice. I've seen this happen in meetings where one person speaks louder, faster, with more intensity, not to make a point clearer, but to take the floor away from everyone else. The intention is simple: overwhelm, outpace, and overpower. And often, it works. People stay silent. They nod just to avoid the confrontation. And in that moment, the person shouting feels as if he's won. But has he really? He may have silenced the room, but he's also exposed his hand. He's revealed his need to control because he lacks something more substantial: respect, wisdom, or calm assurance. As men who value Stoicism, we're offered another way. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that noise doesn't equal strength. He wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And in situations like these, where shouting is used to intimidate, the best response isn't to fight back with more noise. It's to stay calm, still, to show that you cannot be moved by mere volume. A man who remains steady in the face of that kind of manipulation sends a powerful message without raising his voice. He shows he cannot be controlled. And in doing so, he takes back the authority that shouting tries to steal. The truth is, you don't need to dominate the room to own it. You just need to hold yourself with quiet strength, the kind that makes others lean in rather than pull away. And when you do, the one who shouted will be left with his own noise, while you walk away with your dignity intact. Control isn't something you force. It's something you earn. And for those who live by Stoic principles, control starts within, where it belongs. For they've learned it works. Some people yell because, at some point in their life, they discovered that it gets results. It may not be elegant, but it's effective for them. Somewhere along the way, they figured out that raising their voice could stop a conversation, shut people down, or pressure someone into doing what they want. And like any tool that seems to work, they keep it close. They sharpen it, polish it, and reach for it whenever they feel they need an advantage. The problem is, it's not real power. It's manipulation. And once you see it clearly, it loses its grip over you. Think about it. Maybe as children, they threw tantrums and someone gave in. Maybe as young adults, they shouted their way through confrontations because no one ever challenged them to find a better way. Maybe they've come to believe that volume equals control. And in some cases, it does when others allow it. But that kind of control is thin ice. It only works if people keep playing along. You've likely seen this in your own life. The man at the office who raises his voice in meetings, not to offer better ideas, but to shut down dissent, the customer in line who bullies the cashier, believing that if he's loud enough, he'll get what he wants. These aren't isolated cases. This is learned behavior, reinforced over time because someone, somewhere, handed over their peace in exchange for quiet. And so, the cycle repeats. But here's where you come in. As Stoics, we're taught that control doesn't come from conquering others. It comes from mastering ourselves. You can't always stop a man from shouting, but you can refuse to reward it. You can stay steady. You can meet his raised voice with silence or a calm, measured response. And that's where his power begins to slip, because yelling only works when it stirs something in you, when it makes you flinch, defend, or submit. If you don't give it that energy, it becomes hollow. This isn't about pride. It's about principle. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." Someone yelling at you is just noise until you decide to make it personal. You have a choice always. You can stay anchored. You can keep your dignity while they lose theirs. When people realize their old tricks no longer work on you, they face a choice: escalate or retreat. Often they retreat because, deep down, they're looking for the easy win. And a man who holds his ground, who doesn't react to noise, isn't an easy win. He's something they don't quite know how to handle. So, the next time someone raises their voice to steer a situation in their favor, let them make the noise while you keep your strength. You'll find it's a quiet kind of victory. And over time, it teaches others that shouting isn't the language you respond to. Respect is. 5. They feel ignored. There's a kind of shouting that isn't about anger or power. It's about a man feeling invisible. And sometimes the only way he knows to be seen is to raise his voice. It's not elegant, and it's rarely effective. But it's human. When a man believes no one is listening to him, he starts to think that volume is his only option. And when that happens, what you're hearing isn't just noise. It's the sound of someone struggling to matter. I remember a man named Jack. He was a foreman at a steel plant in Ohio, tough as iron, with hands that told stories his mouth never did. Jack had been running that crew for almost 20 years. He'd seen it all: accidents, strikes, young bucks thinking they knew better. And for years, his voice carried weight. People listened when Jack spoke. But times changed. New management came in with new rules. They started holding meetings without him. They made decisions he found out about secondhand. And slowly, without warning, Jack started to feel like a ghost in a place where he'd once commanded respect. I watched him in one of those meetings, 10 men around a table, half of them scrolling through emails while he tried to explain why the new safety protocol wouldn't work. His tone was calm at first, steady, like it had always been. But when no one made eye contact, when no one even looked up, something shifted. Jack's voice got louder, not angry, desperate. He started talking over people, interrupting, repeating himself. And before long, he was shouting. You could hear the frustration cracking through his throat. He wasn't trying to win the argument anymore. He was trying to remind them that he was still there. That's the thing about feeling ignored. It eats at a man, especially a man who's worked his whole life to build something, only to find the world has moved on without him. Shouting, for Jack, wasn't about control. It was about survival. It was about proving he still mattered. Stoicism teaches us to see the world clearly without judgment. Marcus Aurelius said, whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? And maybe you've been Jack in some way. Maybe you felt the sting of being dismissed after decades of showing up. We all have. So, what do we do when someone's shouting because they feel ignored? We listen not because they earned it in that moment, but because we're strong enough to offer it. We listen because a man who feels heard often stops shouting. We don't have to agree. We don't have to give in. But we can respect their humanity by giving them our attention, even briefly. And if that doesn't calm the storm, we stay grounded. We don't get pulled into the noise. A Stoic doesn't abandon his peace because someone else has lost theirs. Jack eventually left that job, walked away with his head high. But I always wondered how things might have turned out if someone had looked him in the eye in that meeting, nodded, and said, I hear you. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes being heard makes the difference between shouting and silence. 6. They're under pressure. There's a simple truth we often forget. People under pressure eventually burst. It's not always a sudden explosion. It builds slowly, like water rising behind a dam that wasn't built to hold that much weight. One more problem, one more deadline, one more unpaid bill, until eventually they reach the limit. And when that pressure breaks the surface, it often does so as shouting loud, sharp, and usually aimed at the person standing closest, whether they deserve it or not. Stress does strange things to the mind. Studies have shown that chronic stress physically rewires the brain, making people more reactive and less able to control emotional outbursts. The part of the brain responsible for rational thinking, the prefrontal cortex, essentially goes offline, while the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, takes over. What you're witnessing when someone screams under pressure isn't always conscious aggression. Often, it's a person caught in fight or flight mode, with no pause button in sight. The trouble is, many men are taught to carry their burdens in silence. They convince themselves that being under pressure is just part of the job, the provider, the leader, the one who's supposed to have the answers. But pressure that's ignored doesn't disappear. It compresses. And eventually, it needs a release valve. For some, that comes in the form of anger, raised voices, or lashing out at the nearest target. You might find yourself on the receiving end of that release without warning, because you happened to be there when they could no longer hold it in. But their outburst doesn't have to become your burden. As Stoics, we are reminded that external events, no matter how loud or sharp, are not within our control. What is within our control is how we respond. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it." A man under pressure may lash out. That's his reaction to his circumstances. Your task is to manage your reaction to him. You are not his pressure valve. You are not his target unless you allow yourself to be. When you recognize that someone's yelling is often just the sound of pressure escaping, you can stand steady. You don't have to absorb it. You don't have to match it. And you certainly don't have to take it home with you. Just as we don't blame the kettle for boiling over when the heat has been left too high for too long, we can acknowledge the stress without getting burned by it. A Stoic man holds his ground because he knows where his responsibility begins and ends. He practices control where it matters within himself. And when others around him lose that control, he becomes a steady presence in the chaos, not because he's indifferent, but because he understands that pressure belongs to the one who carries it. And you have enough weight of your own. 7. They think you're weak. There's a quiet law in human nature. Some people raise their voices because they believe they can. They mistake your silence for softness. They confuse patience with passivity. And if you're the kind of man who listens more than you speak, who stays calm when others stir chaos, there will come a time when someone assumes it's because you're weak. It's an old mistake, but it's still made every day. These are the people who test boundaries by pushing, by raising their tone, by challenging your stillness with noise. They believe if they shout loudly enough, they can unseat your dignity. They expect you to flinch, to bark back, or to fold. And when you don't, they don't quite know what to do with you. This is where the strength of the Stoic shows itself, not in retaliation, not in trying to prove them wrong, but in remaining unmoved. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." A man grounded in his own principles doesn't need to answer every insult or rise to meet another's fury. His presence speaks for him. And that quiet presence has more weight than shouting ever could. When someone raises their voice because they believe you are weak, it is not your job to convince them otherwise. It is your job to remain true to yourself. Strength isn't found in dominance. It's found in mastery over your emotions, your impulses, your pride. Most men spend their lives trying to control others. The Stoic spends his life learning to control himself. And there is no louder message than the one spoken through restraint, calm, steady eye contact, silence that is not submissive, but confident. A man who doesn't flinch under pressure teaches others something they will not easily forget. He cannot be moved by noise. If you live long enough, you learn there's no shortage of men who will test you to see if you'll react. Let them. A man who does not hand over his peace to anyone proves that he is anything but weak. He proves he belongs to himself. And that's the kind of strength that needs no explanation. 8. They're ashamed. Shame is a powerful force. It doesn't always show itself in quiet regret or humble reflection. Sometimes it comes out as anger loud, defensive, and sharp. A man who knows he's made a mistake may try to cover it the only way he knows how, by raising his voice, hoping that if he makes enough noise, you won't notice the truth he's trying to hide. You've seen it before. A man drops the ball on something important. Maybe he forgets a commitment, makes a costly error, or lets someone down. But instead of owning it, he deflects. He shifts the blame, calls attention to your supposed shortcomings, or lashes out at whoever's nearest. His shouting is nothing more than a distraction. It's smoke and mirrors. If he makes you defensive, if he puts you on your heels, maybe you'll stop looking at the real problem, his shame. Psychologists call this projection. The Stoics simply call it what it is, noise. And noise is never a reason to lose yourself. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change. I seek the truth which never harmed anyone." But not everyone lives by those words. Some people are so bound by pride, they'll raise their voice to drown out the truth. This is where your clarity matters. When a man yells out of shame, your job isn't to argue with him. It's to see clearly, to stay steady. No need to call him out. No need to match his energy. Just hold your ground. Let him wrestle with himself while you remain anchored. A Stoic doesn't chase the truth with accusations. He holds space for it with calm. And the truth always rises in time. A man yelling to cover his shame is already carrying a heavy weight. You don't need to add to it or carry it for him. Remain clear-eyed. Remain still. His shame is not your burden. Your strength is in your refusal to be distracted by the noise. And in that silence, you become something few men ever master, unshaken. 9. They feel powerless. Sometimes shouting comes from a deep sense of powerlessness. When a man feels like life is slipping through his fingers, whether it's a job he can't hold on to, a relationship that's fraying, or a world that seems to be moving too fast, he may raise his voice to reclaim some sense of agency. It's not about you. It's about his need to feel like he still has a say, like he can still make something happen. Yelling becomes a way to assert himself in a world that feels indifferent. This kind of shouting often carries a raw, almost desperate edge. You hear it in the voice of someone who's been pushed to the brink, who's tried everything else and found no relief. It's the sound of a man trying to convince himself as much as you that he still matters, that he can still be heard. But as Stoics, we know that true power doesn't come from volume. It comes from within, from the ability to control your own mind, your own reactions, no matter what the world throws at you. Epictetus said, "There is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will." When someone screams because they feel powerless, they're wrestling with that very truth. They're shouting because they haven't yet learned that the only thing they can truly control is themselves. Your role isn't to fix their sense of powerlessness. It's to model what real power looks like. Calm, steady, unshaken. You don't need to argue or push back. Simply hold your ground and let their noise pass through you like a storm that can't touch a mountain. By staying centered, you show them and yourself that power isn't something you seize through noise. It's something you cultivate through silence. 10. They're trying to hide their insecurity. Insecurity is a quiet wound that often manifests as loud behavior. A man who doubts himself, his worth, his abilities, his place in the world may shout to drown out the inner voice that tells him he's not enough. By raising his voice, he hopes to project strength, to convince you and himself that he's in control, that he has it all together. But the louder he gets, the clearer it becomes. He's trying to outrun something inside. This kind of shouting often feels performative, like a mask being worn too tightly. It's the colleague who yells to assert dominance in a meeting because he fears being overlooked. It's the friend who lashes out when you succeed because your progress highlights his own stagnation. Insecurity drives them to shout because silence feels too vulnerable. It might reveal the truth they're desperate to hide. As Stoics, we strive to live with authenticity and self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." A man who shouts to cover his insecurity is living out of alignment with that principle. He's trying to project a version of himself that doesn't match his inner reality. Your task is not to expose his insecurity, that's his journey. Your task is to stay true to your own principles, to remain calm and grounded in the face of his noise. When you refuse to be rattled by someone else's insecurity, you create a kind of mirror. Your stillness forces them to confront their own behavior, even if just for a moment. And while you can't change them, you can protect your own peace. You can walk away knowing that their shouting is their struggle, not yours. A Stoic doesn't need to prove his strength by outshouting the insecure. He proves it by staying true to himself, no matter how loud the world gets. Conclusion. So, why do people scream at you? More often than not, it has little to do with you, and everything to do with the weight they carry: fear, shame, pressure, old habits they never questioned, feelings of powerlessness, or insecurities they can't face. It spills out as noise, hoping to shake someone else loose. But that doesn't have to be you. Your role isn't to fix them, and it certainly isn't to fight them. Your role is to remain steady, to protect your peace like a man guarding his last fire on a cold night. Because once you hand that over, you hand over your power. And you've worked too hard, lived too long, to give that away cheaply. Here's the beauty of it. When you refuse to match their chaos, you teach them something without saying a word. You show them where the real strength is: in stillness, in self-command, in the kind of quiet dignity that no raised voice can touch. So, the next time someone screams at you, pause, take a breath, and stand your ground. You are stronger than they think and calmer than they'll ever understand. If this spoke to you, like, share, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments. I choose calm, because you do, every single time.